Yes, hi. Thanks for this opportunity. Well, Matthias' presentation gave a perfect example of why infrastructures are really needed. So we need the technological infrastructure, and we need the human help and support to make research available. I'm going to talk about how resources and corpora and tools end up in the CLARIN infrastructure. So how that can happen. And the idea behind all of this is fair data. So we would like data to be findable so that researchers know what is available and where. And it should be accessible so that they can actually get the data or use it in a tool of their liking. And if data is stored for in the longer term, it should be interoperable so that the next researcher can also still read the files and work with them, and the data doesn't get old too easily. And the data should also be reusable so that other researchers can actually use it for their new purposes. If you want to find a repository for your own data set, if there's a research team that is producing data, it's a good idea to go to this re3 data registry. You can search for repositories there, and also the CLARIN repositories are listed. So just try different keywords, for example, language or linguistics, and you should be able to retrieve different options for storing the data. And CLARIN also lists the repositories that are included, and you can find a description of what each repository does. So when you're producing a data set, if your project is planning on collecting data or combining data for new purposes, you're probably interested if the repository supports the data format, if you're working with sound, if you're working with video or text, preferably the tools that you are using. It's a good idea to find a repository that supports these data types. You are also interested in if it's easy to deposit a resource. Sometimes you might have open data that you just want to submit quickly and describe it and leave it there and hope that it finds a new audience. Sometimes you might have data that needs to be protected in some way. For example, access controlled, that it cannot be openly available to anybody. Maybe it's just for researchers. Maybe it's just for individual researchers who have a decent research plan that matches the data set. For example, if you're working with data that contains personal data. So these are like grounds that help you delineate the number of repositories that match your wishes and hopes. CLARIN also has this list of accepted data formats where you can find different data types and what types are supported in each repository within CLARIN. And the important thing about depositing your data is you get cited for your data if somebody else reuses it. And to honor this great goal, you should also cite data in a systematic way in your own research. So similarly to other scientific publications. So there's a don't case where there's some random web link that will probably be dead in a couple of months even. But if you use a so-called persistent identifier, which is minted for CLARIN resources mostly, at least in most cases, if you use this identifier, you make sure that the resource is actually, or there is some information about the resource at least in some years or decades, so that it doesn't matter if the resource is relocated to some other service later on. So please use a handle or DOI or URN whichever of these PID types is found in the metadata of the resource of your liking. There's a lot of CLARIN centers. I'm going to show some examples of the Language Bank of Finland, which I represent myself. So this is just a case of an example of a repository that where you can deposit different types of data. We welcome data from any field of research, basically, but it should be a language resource containing text or speech, running language in some language. Mainly Finnish, but we also take other languages that, well, if the resource has been collected in a Finnish project, for example. And we can help you in storing and distributing the corpus. We can accept various types of datasets. There's a lot of datasets already available. You can find a list of them on the website of the Language Bank. So we also provide citation instructions. You just click on the double quote mark and you can find metadata and the license information of a particular resource. Here's an example of a citation instruction that you should use, preferably if you use one of these resources. And a dataset can actually be made available in various ways. It can be, as was mentioned by Christina earlier, it can be available in a concordancer or a tool like that. It can also be available for download. So you can just download it to your own machine or to a server and process it there and work with it there. In the Language Bank, we also have a copy of some downloadable resources already in the computing environment, so that it's more accessible. You don't have to copy a large number of files or a big zip archive in order to process it, so you can start using it more directly. If you need to download it, speech corpora can, for example, be used in various applications that you can use in your own computer if they are annotated, for example, in Prat or Elan, which are tools where you can use audio or video material. So what kind of data can be deposited? Well, text or speech in any natural language. You should have the rights to distribute data, at least for research purposes. So you need to be aware of possible copyrights or other IPR. If the dataset contains personal data, you should be worried about that even before you start collecting the data. So you have to inform the subjects and so forth, according to the instructions given by your own research institution. And of course, you have to collect it ethically. We don't want to, deposit any unethically collected data. Usually it's, researchers don't do that, but maybe somebody else. CLARIN offers a common framework of license categories, so there can be publicly available data. There can be data that's available for academic users that requires institutional login, for example, of your own university. So there are these federations like EduGain that you probably saw before. So these are exactly where infrastructures come in. They negotiate these kind of common principles on which people can be allowed to log in with their own account to services abroad. And in some cases, the data can be restricted, so based on an individual application only. There can also be other license conditions that have been somewhat standardized. So usually research data should be cited, no matter if it's required or not. It's a good principle just to make it, replicable, that your work should be like transparent in that way. So if you use somebody else's data set, it's good practice to cite them. And then there might be some other restrictions applied on a data set. We don't want to use any extra restrictions, but just in case it needs to be done, then we can provide this kind of license and support it. It's a resource, for example, contains personal data. At least the Language Bank of Finland can accept it, but we will negotiate a deposition agreement with you, and then we will set specific data protection terms and conditions for that resource, which can have, well, some necessary requirements, like the researcher who's using the data needs to provide a privacy notice, for example, to the Language Bank that we can publish for them, or that the data cannot be transferred outside the European Economic Area without certain requirements fulfilled, and so forth. So these kinds of individual restrictions can also be applied. So if safety measures are required for sharing your data, you have to consider repositories that can provide access management, for example. Not all of them can, so sometimes the repository can only accept open resources that are publicly available. But there are some CLARIN repositories that can use this kind of access management. We can also provide the resource-specific data protection terms if necessary, if the resource contains personal data. So all end users must accept these terms, and they become also, or their home organization becomes the data controller of that new use case of the material. So that's the idea. In some cases, we can also offer the data in encrypted format, so that we encrypt it for a particular end user if that's necessary, just to make the data transfer more secure. But that's not the full story. So encrypting the data does not, of course, it does not make sure that the data is not misused, or that it doesn't leak or be disclosed to outsiders, but it's just one safety measure that we can use if necessary. And there are also sensitive data services at the CSC, IT Center for Science in Finland, which is basically a government-owned business that provides IT services for us. And they have this environment where individual projects can safely keep their data sets and process it in a closed environment that is not in the internet, for example, at all. So these kinds of solutions are available. So there's one example resource where you can see how the deposition process goes. So there was a resource called Collage or Collage. I don't know if it was contains Spanish from Spain and Mexico. And because it contained personal data, then we had to make sure that all the documents were okay. So we talked to the researcher and found out that the interviewees had been informed about the data being made available under a restricted license in the Language Bank of Finland, that it would not be transferred there and so forth. So we can honor that information that they were given, and we were able to negotiate an agreement. So basically, we started by publishing the metadata record of the resource, and we gave a PID, a persistent identifier, to the dataset. So even before the data is in the Language Bank, the researcher can already start citing their own dataset in publications. It has a PID, so later on when the data is available, the PID still works. And that's often a thing that researchers like, that when it's almost ready and they have to report to the funder, they can say that, okay, here's the citation, it will be available. So, and if the agreement has been signed, then we are all good. And after this, we negotiate the deposition agreement. We find out what the license should be, and the researcher can upload the data to us, and we process, repackage, and add a README document and the license document to the download archive, and then we make it available and it's listed. And the researcher is happy, of course. And this is how we make the data findable it has a PID, it's accessible. Even if it's restricted, it's still accessible to those who are allowed to access it. And it's interoperable because we checked it basically that the files work and they are in a common approved format. And it's reusable because we know what the license is and it can be stored in the long term. And we know that it's okay. It's not illegal. And if it's illegal, we know who is responsible, so who can be blamed. So this is the collection of all the services, and this couldn't be done without an infrastructure like CLARIN. So no repository can do this alone. So this is the collection of all the different bits and pieces in this whole machine.